Welcome, friends and foes, survivors and killers. Let's sit around the campfire together and talk about Dead by Daylight. Specifically, Year 6 of DBD, because it's been a hell of a strange one. I'll start off by establishing that this past year has not been terribly kind to this game. After the DBD player base peaked at an insane historic high when the Resident Evil chapter hit, the player base has been on a shallow but steady decline throughout the year, only starting to seriously pick up again with the 6th year anniversary in the Roots of Dread chapter. In this video, I'd like to discuss not just the challenging elements of Year 6 that may have contributed to player disillusionment, but also the good bits too, because we can't identify DBD's problems in the last year and learn from them without acknowledging that we got a lot of good things too. Let's talk about the highlights and low points of Dead by Daylight Year 6. The chapters in Dead by Daylight Year 6 were Resident Evil, Portrait of a Murder, Sadako Rising, and the two mini-chapters, Hellraiser and Hour of the Witch. Year 6 also saw a return to new maps after Year 5 mostly took a break from them, bringing us Raccoon City Police Department and Eyrie of Crows, as well as a rework to Haddonfield. Just to give a sense of the content and timeframe this video will be covering, I'd like to start with something positive: the quality of licensed content that Dead by Daylight received in Year 6. With 3 of the year's killers being licensed, we haven't had such a high density of licensed releases in a single year since Year 2, which brought us A Nightmare on Elm Street and Saw as full chapters, with a paragraph bringing Leatherface to the party as well. But speaking as a horror aficionado, Year 6 did a way better job of adapting their licensed source material into chapters, even if Hellraiser and Ringu don't have the same brand recognition that Nightmare and Saw do. I firmly believe Pinhead is still the best licensed adaptation Behaviour has ever done, and you can really tell it was the dream license chapter of the developers. Everything about him feels incredibly authentic to Pinhead, from the gameplay to the animations and sound design. Hell, they got Doug fucking Bradley back to voice him eventually, how do you beat that? And the other 2 licensed chapters were also extremely high quality. Ringu, I think, is the year's most underrated chapter, a sleeper hit that brought Sadako to life in our game in a way that feels pretty authentic, and expanded the story of Ringu by integrating Yoichi as the survivor. Even Resident Evil, a chapter I'm pretty mid on for the most part, still gave us some gorgeous licensed content. Nemesis, Jill, Leon and the RPD all look and feel like they've been ripped straight from the games. And despite a lot of people, myself included, wishing the killer was a bit different, I think they did the best they could with the character of Nemesis, who was never going to be easy to authentically adapt. Hot take here? Probably the most underrated part of this chapter has to be the music. Resident Evil has almost certainly the best music of any chapter they've ever made, with Nemesis' terror radius, chase theme and the menu music all being absolute bangers that really sound like a Resident Evil soundtrack. It fucking slaps. So overall, the quality of licensed adaptations has been incredibly high this year. But what about original stuff? We only had 3 original new characters this year: Michaela Reed in Hour of the Witch, and the artist and Jonah Vasquez in Portrait of a Murder. I don't think you need me to tell you just how much of a flop these 3 were. I want to get something off my chest. I think I went too hard on Michaela in my video for her, and frankly I wish I could redo it, because one of the very few videos on my channel I outright regret making. But it's sponsored, so there's not a lot I can do about it for now. And while I don't love her, I'm clearly in the minority of people here because I see her played so much, and getting a shit ton of cosmetics accordingly. Although a lot of that might be her perk, which I'll get into later. This leaves Carmina and Jonah. Whew, boy, there's a lot to unpack about these 2 and not a lot of it's good. Unlike Michaela, a character I've kind of come round to, Jonah I fully maintain is a complete disaster who never should have left the drawing board. And while my hostility to the character is perhaps more aggressive than most people I see, very few Jonah enjoyers seem to exist in the wild. Or the few I do spot are very normal people who are very good at staying calm on the internet. The upcoming tome for him is probably going to be Damage Control to save the burning wreck that is his character, and time will only tell if it works. Carmina, on the other hand, is a beautiful hot mess. My beautiful hot mess. From her power creating the uber zoning situations that used to be a thing for old Pyramid Head, to her lore fundamentally missing beats that need to be present for her character to make sense, there's a lot wrong with how Carmina is implemented into the game. That being said, I don't fucking care. I love her so much, I legit do not personally care. I know Carmina has the potential to be one of DBD's most intelligently written characters. I just know she isn't there yet. And while I know her power is pretty unhealthy, I'll play her anyway because I think she's fun as shit to play, even though I'm not sure that opinion's terribly popular. Michaela, Jonah and Carmina, I think, struggled to capture the imaginations of a lot of players, or if they did, it was for the wrong reasons. As a result, despite how much I love Carmina with my whole twisted black heart, I have to say the original releases of Year 6 were without a doubt its weakest. Speaking of those wrong reasons, each chapter released this year brought a new perk or power that contributed in some way to something very dire that I'm going to call gameplay fatigue. Killers got a substantial suite of new gen aggression and slowdown perks in the past year, including Pain Resonance, Deadlock, Call of Brine and the new buff Deadman Switch, that have allowed killers to play with true 3 or 4 slowdown builds in ways you'd never really seen before. The closest we'd ever really come to that prior used perks that tended not to play very well together, like Ruin and Pop for example. But now you can run suites of gen control perks that benefit each other directly. Corrupt Intervention, Deadlock, Pain Resonance and Deadman Switch for example, that stack up their effects all at the same time. In addition, the killer power designs have been pretty unpopular too, with Artist and Nemesis both being continuations of the Turbo Zoner strategies that we saw in Deathslinger, Demogorgon and Pyramid Head in the years prior, and Pinhead bringing a passive slowdown mechanic to the game that has proven controversial. Another hot take here, I think the limit configuration is a fine mechanic if solving during a chain hunt was made a bit more intuitive so you wouldn't get chained while solving. But alongside the heavy slowdown perks that killers can add to their builds, I get why the limit configuration is so annoying for a lot of Survivor players. It's why I'm looking forward to slowdown changes. I think Pinhead will become a lot more enjoyable for Survivors to play against, and hopefully will result in fewer players giving up on Hook or DCing during my games playing him, when they don't have to fight through so much game delay on top of the lament configuration. But as much as I do sympathise with the Survivors who don't like the aforementioned design decisions, holy fuck, Killer had it so much worse this year. I don't know whether you've heard of it, but there was this little perk called Circle of Healing that basically took over the game completely, and was quite likely one of the most overpowered perks Survivors have ever been able to play with. Being able to fully reset the whole team with efficient self-healing because a single person brought a single perk has made a lot of games absolutely miserable for Killer. And unlike the quad slowdown builds and unpleasant chase powers, these were literally every single game for months on end. No matter how much you dislike Artist or Nemesis' powers, or hate quad slowdown builds, you weren't getting those every single game. If you played Killer for those first couple months after Circle's release, you were legit getting at least one in all of your matches, and often multiple. You rarely got 4 at once, but because a single boon benefits the entire team, you didn't need more than 2 in most games anyway. This even bounced back and negatively affected the Survivor experience too. Players picked killers with super oppressive chase powers that ended chases very quickly, like Nemesis, Nurse or Blight, because any killer that required you to split pressure through injuries, like the new killer Sadako, got their shit absolutely rocked by a single circle of healing. And killers would tunnel more frequently, because if an injured survivor was allowed to run away off the hook, they'd heal up immediately and be back on a generator within a couple of seconds. Maybe if the meta allowed killers who could apply pressure through injury states to thrive a little bit more, we'd see less turbo zoners and top tier killers, because other types of killers wouldn't just lose to a perk. Didn't help the killer experience that Dead Hard, one of the most common and irritating survivor perks, got buffed this year. With Dead Hard validation meaning survivors would no longer be exhausted on the ground, and validation coming with several unintended power interactions made Dead Harding an attack late in getting validated becoming even more powerful than a regular Dead Hard. As such, lobbies with 3 or 4 Dead Hards became increasingly common, making the experience of playing Killer that much more draining. And let's not forget Boil Over, a perk buff so poorly thought out that killers had to spend 2 weeks worth of games bleeding out half the survivors in the lobbies because they just run to arbitrary places on a random map and become completely unhookable. So that was nice as well. Boil Over got handled pretty quickly, but Dead Hard has remained super strong and will do until at least the new mid-chapter, which despite nerfing the perk is still likely to make it extremely strong as any projectile killer, possibly stronger against them than it ever has been. and Circle of Healing has survived 3 separate attempts to nerf it to remain the best healing perk in the game since it came out. These factors have made playing Killer this year incredibly unappealing, especially if you're not running super good builds or super good killers and just hoping to have a pleasant time. It creates a level of fatigue with DBD's long-term players, and that's been one of the biggest issues of DBD's 6th year of content. The biggest saving grace this year against this gameplay fatigue has been the killer reworks. There's been more killer reworks this year than there have been in any other prior, with Spirit, Deathslinger, Trapper, Plague, Legion and Ghostface all getting major updates to both their base kit and their add-ons. And most of these have been rampant successes. Plague went from being the best designed killer in the game who felt clunky to play, to the best designed killer in the game who now feels smooth as shit to play, and has some great new add-ons to boot. Spirit is now a lot more fair, even if some of her add-ons are as dumb as ever, and Trapper got a much needed boost to his base kit to make him less RNG reliant, on top of some really sweet add-ons. But the biggest winner of this year in terms of killer updates is easily Legion. A killer who was floundering for a while despite their incredible popularity is now actually a pretty solid killer, with some lethality added to their power, and some interesting new add-ons that even change the killer's chase music. The only 2 I think that somewhat misfired were Deathslinger and Ghostface. Slinger got hit pretty hard, and while some changes did need to happen, Slinger's not in a great state at the moment and could really do with a bit of compensation for the nerfs he received. And despite Ghostface having way more add-on diversity than he used to have, he fell victim to people who didn't know how his reveal mechanic worked not breaking him out properly, and it's now way too easy to do, leaving him arguably weaker than he was before. But overall, these have been some pretty great updates. Ghosty and Slinger could do with some love, but it's not like those killers are strictly worse than they were before. There's certainly more options and add-ons if nothing else, and the other reworks have been absolute bangers, so I have no doubts in affirming these updates have been, by and large, successes. But this does come with a caveat. The other balance updates killers have received in this time have been weird and often not good. They treated Nemesis' lack of add-on diversity by gutting his only truly good add-on and buffing his tier 3 zoning. For some reason, they addressed Blight and Nurse having truly egregious add-ons that broke the game in half by adding more truly egregious add-ons that broke the game in half. And when Wraith started to get played again, they thought it would be funny to nerf him for basically no reason at all. But my favourite balance update has to be Twins, because I saw the Twins having the lowest pick rate in the game of probably any killer ever, with a super low kill rate, hard countered by several of the newest perks, trying to be an injury snowball killer in a healing meta, while ridden with bugs, and having lost most of their techs due to changes in Victor's height detection rules, and decided they needed to nerf their add-ons. I have no words for the amount of headassery the balanced yet behaviour has demonstrated with regards to the Twins. I know the lead game designer Patrick is a self-described turbo stoner, but he's clearly been sharing that shit around the office, because there's no other way I can explain how much Twins have been neglected and left to die this year. Holy shit, it's been so bad. And that's not even going into the fact that they've stopped tweaking the balance of new killers shortly after they come out like they used to. Killers used to have a window in the second mid-chapter after their release where they got balance tweaks to make sure they settled alright. Twins got their 5-second cooldown nerf, Trickster got his knife count and add-on changes, Nemesis got his zoning and Marvin's blood changes, and Pinhead got his soul time and ultra rare add-on nerfs. But they seem to have stopped doing this in recent months. It's been over half a year since Carmina came out and she's had no changes since release. And this upcoming mid-chapter should be when Sadako gets her update, but she doesn't seem to be getting changed either. We're getting these big exciting killer reworks, but it seems to be coming at the cost of much needed maintenance on new killers. And don't tell me they didn't have time to fix Twins or nerf Alchemist Ring. They had time to nerf Toy Sword and Stale Biscuit and buff Adrenaline Vial. They clearly did have time, and just decided to use it doing some really dumb shit. And that I think is a big black mark against Year 6. When killers weren't getting big exciting reworks, the changes they got were bizarre at best and non-existent at worst. And if we want to talk about disappointing new content, where would we be without talking about maps? We only had 2 new maps this year, RPD and Eyrie of Crows, and both are just miserable for completely different reasons. RPD is both unbelievably massive and incredibly claustrophobic, making it easy to get lost as a survivor and almost impossible to traverse with most killers. The tight winding corridors method hook distribution, so you often can't hook survivors. Every vault and pallet is either unbelievably safe or ridiculously worthless, and the lighting is often very poor, meaning visibility is even worse than most indoor maps. There's a very good reason it's getting a rework when Project W comes around. Eyrie of Crows is marginally better, but not by a lot. The main building is one of the safest structures in any map in the game. The majority of the map is so stacked with relatively good filler pallets that it gives a lot of old Ormond vibes. It totally lacks grass, making trap killers a pain to play, and, much like RPD, has a lot of spots that can easily become total hook dead zones. But let's not forget the map rework this year, Haddonfield, and what a rework it was. Haddonfield was a horrid map before, and it's arguably worse than it's ever been after this update. The map can only be described now as a Gideon meat plant, but for Godwin instead of God pallets, because the whole map is either a total dead zone or the strongest building you could possibly devise, including one that, if you run it right and can cause a killer to break chase with you, is a literal, actual, old school style infinite against 115 killers without a gap closer or chase ender power. Why? Why is this map okay? Who approved this? But before I get into the elephant in the room, I want to talk about one last good thing that this year has brought DBD players, and that's patch stability. Cast your mind back to the start of the year, the Resident Evil chapter that launched during the 5th anniversary. That patch totally bricked the game for console players for like 2 months solid. The anniversary is basically not an event for them because performance was so bad. But by the time Hellraiser rolled around, patches were starting to get better. Yeah, Pinhead launched with a bug lunge for a week or two, but that's better than the whole game being unplayable for months on end. And Portrait of Murder and Ringu were both relatively bug-free chapters, which you can really see when you compare them to Year 5. Year 5 brought us All Kill, which made pallets just not stun killers. Descend Beyond that brought us J-Flicks and Blight's tiny POV, and just everything to do with the Binding of Kin. This year has come a really long way for quality control of behaviour, and that's fundamentally a great accomplishment for Year 6. But it's time to talk about the big kahuna, the biggest disaster of the year, and it's 3 little letters I'm pretty sure you all know by now. MMR. After hanging the idea of it over our heads for years like the sword of fucking Damocles, Behaviour finally implemented skill-based matchmaking this year. And before I talk about why it was such a big problem, I want to channel the spirit of my fellow Brit Pebsy here and do a little bit of myth busting.
Alright!
MMR did not cause players who were not bringing super strong builds to start bringing them. I think there's this level of roasting to spectacles about what DBD was like before MMR that's just not true. Players still brought super strong stuff all the time, and it was often even stronger than what you see today. Moris, Keys, Decisive Strike, Object of Obsession, Metal of Man, Prayer Beads, pre-nerf Ruin Undying. What MMR did was take players who played well and escaped a lot or killed a lot of survivors and rewarded them by making their games worse. Because a survivor's MMR going up or not depends entirely on whether or not they escape the trial, MMR rewards survivors who engage in poor team play, like leaving their friends on hook while they do generators, or escape without trying to organise a save. And for Killer, that isn't that bad on paper, because if tons of survivors escape, you'll get placed in easier matches until they're comfortable. But for Survivor, it pushes bad teammates who are efficient on gens and escape to the highest MMR brackets. And this is where both sides start to really struggle. Survivors bring really strong perks, items and map offerings to get their escapes more consistently, and Killers bring strong perks and add-ons to all play super oppressive killers to not get steamrolled, creating a vicious cycle. This is only exacerbated by how much stronger the super strong stuff is than everything else, and how many super strong survivor perks especially are very good at undoing mistakes that the user or their team makes. This provides a feeling of playing as a team's perks of playing against the players quite a lot, making the killer experience especially absolutely draining. This isn't inherently AMR's fault, it's the perks that create these scenarios. But AMR made the problem worse because suddenly every boosted team or killer getting carried by them were all vibing in one place, the high MMR bracket. It seems like there's more sweat than there used to be because all the sweaty gamers are condensed into the same relatively small high MMR matchmaking pool. It's confirmation bias. DBD was never designed to be played with a system like this, and Year 6 is in proof of that. The balance issues that this game has always had on many of its strongest perks and killers have impacted games in really bad ways, and everyone dislikes it. It's why the upcoming mid-chapter is rolling with a huge number of perk updates. It's finally behaviour catching up and recognising that the current perk system doesn't work for DBD in 2022. That's good. It's a recognition of progress, and that's what I want this video to be remembered as. I want to look back on this video in a year's time and say behaviour's gotten better. They've celebrated their successes and set right what went wrong this year. I want to say that the original characters have become more compelling. I want to say that map and perk design is getting better, and active balance maintenance on killers is being done more intelligently and with more transparency. Transparency, yeah, there was something I wanted to say about that as well. What was it? Oh shit, yeah, the NFT thing. Oh yeah, that absolute unmitigated disaster. Well, I have forgotten about it. It's getting its own video in a few weeks' time because there's a lot to unpack about it, about how we've reacted to it as a community that I want to talk about that has ramifications way beyond just Dead by Daylight. So I haven't forgotten about that. A video about it is coming, looking back on it. But yeah, that was not the best part of last year. But let's not talk about that. Let's talk about something good. So far, it really does look like Year 7 is shaping up to be alright. Map design is still absolutely rancid, legit fuck Garden of Joy, but between the detailed roadmap we were given for the next year of DBD and the mid-chapter looking to really shake things up, I'm carried by a sense of cautious optimism. I know I'm far from the only one. The anniversary has brought with it a huge explosion in DBD's player count over the past couple of weeks, and it couldn't have come at a better time. So all in all, happy birthday Dead by Daylight, and here's to another year of fun and frustration in the fog. Well, that's all I had to say about the 6th year of Dead by Daylight. For you waiting on my next lore video, the Yoichi video has already been finished, and is waiting on copyright approval to be able to be uploaded. I actually finished it on the 25th, but the same company that caused me copyright issues before with my Sadako video has claimed the video again, and despite not even owning the rights to Ringu, they're preventing me from monetizing the video until they manually review the claim. As such, my Yoichi video will actually mention that this video is coming out, even though this video is going to be coming out before the Yoichi video. If you want to make sure you catch it, please do feel free to subscribe if you're new to the channel, and check out the Discord and Twitter links in the description so you never miss another upload. My Patreon is also down there where you can get advanced showings of my videos ad-free. Patrons will have already watched this video because it's going up a day early for them. They'll also have seen the Yoichi video because that's stuck and unlisted at the moment, so they've seen it anyway. But yeah, if you're out there to support my way and getting your hands on some excellent rewards, the link to that is in the description as well, along with a link to the channel's new long-term partner, Wraith Energy. They make delicious, sugar-free esports and gaming supplements to deliver long-term energy without the crash. If you want to check them out, use the link in the description and my partner code PIX20 to get 20% off your order. Hope you had a great 6th anniversary, and I'll see you in the next one. Ta-ta for now.